Hello and welcome to a Flosstube Extra with the Stitching Owl, where we are going to learn the fourth way. Yes, it's been a busy week for videos of fully finishing the 12 Days of Christmas mini stockings by Beez folk art. Now, I have the pleasure of doing this as a stitch along with many other floss tubers. My partner for sure is Dottie the Stitching Scotty, and we've joined forces with Annie the Proper Stitcher, Alicia the Fanciful Flamingo, the Bougie Stitchers, as well as Kathy from Two Needles Pulling Thread. The Bougie Stitchers are Nancy and Jenny. I remembered both of your names this time. So this is going to be your reference point, and as always, I'm going to say I'm not going to be opening this book because it's a copyrighted pattern that I will be inviting you to purchase at your local needlework shop, or I got mine from Lindy Stitches and it was shipped out so immediately it got here in less than a week. So for this particular stitch, I am using a 28 count red Lugana. It's an even weave, and that equals the 14 count that most people are doing this on. If you'd like to see a black example, please consult the latest videos of Annie the Proper Stitcher and Dottie the Stitching Scotty. I have been providing you with methods using a variety of colors as background and a variety of sizes. So as always, step one is make sure that you have fully stitched your pattern. You don't have to have started on day one just because I did. And make sure that you have completed all of the embellishing that you want. We are not going to add beads after this is completed. It needs to be done now. I recommend that you press your stitch by putting a towel on your pressing surface and then placing the stitch with your stitch side down into the towel and then press on the back side. If you have used any over dyes or have any questions, don't use mist or steam, do a dry press. Mine is a dry press and it turned out just fine. Although I actually don't really have any worries about bleeding of colors. Sometimes people are a little concerned. So that is step one. And step two, of course, is that the 12 Days of Christmas book, if you turn the page after the 11th and 12th day pattern, then you will find that you have the shape sitting right there for you to copy to make your template. Now, today, because I used the equivalent of 14 count, my shape is going to be at 100%. If you have used a 32 count even weave or linen or 16 count Aida, then copying it at 90% is recommended. And if you did it on 18 count or 36 linen, then 85%. But these percentages are my choice and my taste. The best thing that you can do is to take the outline of your template and put it under your stitch and then hold it up to a light source like a window. Oh, my white wall is actually working quite nicely. So I'm happy that this goes almost to the edge of everything. Now, if you've used beads, you do need to make sure that you leave enough space on the edges that when we sew this using a sewing machine, that we don't end up either breaking our beads or causing a wonkiness as the presser foot has issues trying to work around it. One of the things I will be doing to be on the safe side with regards to that is I will be using a zipper foot that won't actually have the foot go over into the stitch side. Up here, I don't have a bead close to the edge. Over here, I do. So that's just what I'm going to choose to do. You know your sewing machine best. And as always, you can use the quilter stitch that I taught in my first video where I was talking about the pillow finish and do everything by hand. You do not need to do this with a machine. So what we did was we printed this. I did this at 100%, and then I rough cut around the whole thing, and then I got 2 layers of comic book board that I had used a glue stick to glue together, and then I glue sticked my template onto this, and with that sandwich I cut around this all at one time. So I now have a template. Now, for the purposes of this video, we are not going to be using this for anything other than a template. It's not used in the final stitch. So we won't have to be worrying about making multiple copies of this the way we do when we are actually stretching our material around this. So that is step 2. Now, step 3 is to take a piece of paper. You can use tracing paper if you've got some handy, something fairly thin, or what I did is I got gridded paper and I traced around my stocking onto the gridded paper. So I just placed this on here and I went right around it. Because I've got a double layer of comic book board, it's easy to trace around. I do go gently because I want to make sure that I don't trace around this so hard that I actually affect the size of this. I'm going to be checking this after 3 or 4 to make sure that my template is still the same size after using some tracing. So I've traced around it, and then what we're going to do is we're going to make a pattern where we add a 1/4 inch for our seam allowance on these sides. So all the way around here, bottom, and up this side, we're adding a 1/4 inch. At the top, I'm going to recommend adding a 1/2 inch. Now the beauty of doing this on graph paper is that I could use the boxes that were right here instead of having a bit of a battle with precision with a ruler that doesn't always do curves well. So this is my pattern now. So I'm going to invite you to go off and make your template and your pattern, and then come back for the next step. Step 4. So our next step is a fun one for me. We get to choose our lining fabric and our backing fabric, excuse me. So it's fun for me because I have the equivalent of a quilt shop here and can go through lots of things. For me, my recommendation is to choose something that goes with or matches the fabric for your stitch rather than to go with contrasting. Contrasting can be really beautiful, and frequently the innards of stockings is a lighter color than the outside. The reason that I'm making everything pretty much just red is that it's more forgiving. I have made stockings before, but this is the first time I've made one of this size. And so I want to do it in a way that if anything isn't quite lined up perfectly, it is more likely that no one will notice because everything's the same color. So when I decided on my backing, I decided on a red dot. And for my lining, a basic red. So this is just 100% cotton solid. So off you go. Figure out what it is that you want as your backing and your lining. Step 5. Okay, we're going on with our next step. Now, just in case you have questions, is it possible to do this without lining it and just have it with the front and the back? The answer to that is yes, you can make that choice. The reason that I use a lining every time when I have the stitch on a stocking is when it is filled, you can put like gift cards or candies with wrappers in it. As whoever the receiver is taking things out, the edges of the filling can actually pull on the back side of your stitch, and as such it could end up that there's some distortion on the right side of your fabric, and I don't want that to happen, so I am lining it. But this is completely your choice. You might not have a fabric store at your house. So what I did is I cut a square that was big enough for the added area, and I've got 2 squares of the red and 1 square of the backing polka dot, and of course I've got my stitch. So we now need to make a sandwich. On goes the glasses. So here we go. When you make your sandwich, pretty side down for the backing, pretty side up for the lining of the backing. Now, I have a solid here, so for all intents and purposes, the front and the back is the same. A true quilter would be able to tell you that there's a right and a wrong side to these solids, but let's not worry about that because you and I can't tell. And then we put the lining for the front and we put it pretty side down. And I'm just trying to line everything up a little bit. And then we put on our stitch pretty side up. So we have a sandwich of 4. We need to actually take just a moment and place this pattern. We're going to lift off this just for a moment, and we're going to place this. Hang on, let's see if I can get this right. And the light has gone just enough that we cannot see through anymore. So what I'm trying to do is to make sure I'm going to go to my window, which happens to be just to my left, so that I can see through. Okay. We have another storm coming in, so I'm starting to lose my light. So I have that in a place that I think is acceptable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to pin it to my stitch, making sure that I do not go through a spot that has stitching. So for me, I am using this spot right here. I'm going to show you my back. No, I don't have the prettiest back on earth, but right here, The stocking comes over here as it goes around. So there's a little blank spot, so I'm not going through the stitch. And then I'm going to hold it up to the light one more time and make sure that I'm still happy with where that is. Okay, so by touch, I can tell that my bottom bead is right at the stitch line. That is a concern because that means that I could actually have a needle from my sewing machine go through the bead and break, or it could smash the bead, at which point I have to go back to the drawing board. So I just shifted this a bit, and then I check again to make sure, okay, there's that side, there's this side. So my bottom is good, but now this side is too close. So you see, you have to wrangle this a little bit to make sure that this is precisely what you want, because we're about to cut this material. And if this isn't exactly right, we've cut. Okay, so that's that. That's that. So I'm using my fingers to actually see through. Now, if this was tracing paper, it would be much easier to see through. I'm going to shift it one more time. So I'm doing this in real time to show you that even for somebody who's done stuff before, we don't get it right the first time all the time. Ah, now that's better. Okay, so now I'm happy with this, and I'm going to put it down on top of my sandwiched materials. I'm going to make sure that no matter what, all edges are safely on all of the different things, and then I get out the handy little bag that I made specifically for my clover clips, and I'm going to clip this in place. Without clipping it to my typed instructions. Okay, so I now have clips holding this together. Be prepared to take time to do this. This is not the time to think, I want to get this done. You want to give yourself the opportunity to really feel comfortable. And then, of course, that means that you'll be ready for the next step. So off you go, make your sandwich. Step 6. Can you guess what I'm going to say to do next? We are actually going to cut. So we are going to cut on the outer line, which allows us to have enough material to be able to sew this. So we're going to cut on the outer line through all of the levels. That will make it so that, because we've been careful with how we put our ups and downs, that all of the toes will be going the right direction. The correct direction. Maybe I should put it that way, because they can't all go right unless some of them will be wrong. Oh my goodness. And then I am actually going to lift off my stitch, and I am going to zigzag around my stitch. You can choose, if you don't want to zigzag, to use fray check. I'm going to put this like this so you can see this is a fray fix. clear nail polish, and we will need to stop the fraying in some way. So you need to make a choice that's comfortable for you. If you're choosing one of these two items, you will need to pause a bit or use a hairdryer to ensure that everything is dry before you continue on. But it's time to be brave. We're going to cut, and we are going to make sure that we have made our stitching piece sewing ready by making sure that our material cannot fray. Off you go. Step 7. So here we are, and you can see that this is my stitch. I've zigzagged around this, and then I took extra care to add some of my fray check. This is a spot that always needs to be clipped, and here and here. So it's a little bit coarser than the rest because it's got something that's dried right into it. So now we are going to put our sandwich back together. I will say, so I'm going to again try not to go through any spot that has a stitch when I put the one pin in. I am going to bring to your attention what I did before I zigzagged, is I trimmed off the actual corner, and I'm going to do that with all of the other layers right now, because having corners there is bulky. Having corners there times 4 layers, too much for a little ornament. Okay, which of course means I've got little points of material, but now I've got that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that this is nicely sturdy. I'm going to put a clover clip on the bottom as well. We are going to find this, and we're going to place it over top of our stitch again. So it looks like this. And now everywhere that has a corner, we are going to clip, but we're going to stop 1/8 of an inch away from our template in order to be sure that when we sew the rounded curves, they will lie flat when we turn it right side out. But we're not going to clip so far that we've got a problem with a slice in showing on our actual front. So here we have this. Now I tend to do all of the layers at the same time. You might not be comfortable with that. But as I mentioned, this spot right here is one of the spots that needs that clip. So I just put that clip in, and I don't think it went quite far enough. Now, if your backing or lining are woven versus just straight cotton, please make sure you've put fray check on those curves before you start this. Okay, so I've done that ankle, but now I need to go around the toe. And you can see that I'm actually putting quite a few of those in, and now that last one didn't go quite far enough. So let's make sure, yep. It's a fine line between making sure you've got it far enough and going too far. So I'm going to put some in here at the heel as well. So I now have, get the scissors off my fingers, a clip here. I've got, let's see if I can spread it out. I've got a clip here. That doesn't look like it's in far enough. The fact that I could barely get it to open up is a real clue. So clip there, clip here, there, and then I have it over here on the heel as well. Okay, go and do this. Step 8. Okay, so our next step is to actually take out the clips and the pin, and what we're going to do is we're going to separate our layers into our lining and our front and back. Now the front and back, we are going to put pretty side to pretty side. And you can choose whether you use a pin or a clover clip to hold these in place. There we go. I think I'm going to clover clip that one. So that was the front to the back. Now, the next step might surprise you a bit. I'm going to pin my 2 lining pieces. I'm going to put that in like this. And now I'm going to take a set of sharp scissors and I'm going to trim away just a little bit to all the sides except for the top. And I better put the glasses on or this will not go well. Now when I say just a little bit, I'm talking like a scant 1/16 of an inch, which means it's hardly anything at all, but it is that little bit. So I'm just going to show you how much I'm trimming off. Tiny bit. Now, you're probably all wondering, well, what's she doing that for? Didn't we just carefully do this? Well, yes, actually we did just carefully do this. But when we put our lining on the inside of our other stocking, if it's exactly the same size and not that hint smaller, there tends to be little bubbles as it tries to fit, like it's just a little bit too snug. So I just go around and I take that little bit off. Because I don't want little bubbles to be showing on my final result. So you can see that I'm barely doing anything, just enough to make a real mess of the paper below with little flecks. And again, I'm not worried about doing it on the top because we're not sewing that part shut. Otherwise, we don't have a fillable stocking. So that is our next step. Let me see. So we actually did 7 and 8 together by separating these out and then doing our trimming. So off you go. Step 9. So the next step is to actually sew the lining sections together with a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. Do not sew shut the top. You're going to start on one of these edges and backtrack where you started so that it's nice and firm and can't undo. Go all the way around, and when you get to the other end, backtrack here and then cut your thread. And then you guessed it, you're going to do the exact same thing with the front and back, going 1/4 inch all the way around, backtracking at the beginning and the ending, but do not do this top area. This can be done by hand if you prefer. I'm going to use a machine, but totally fine if you're a hand sewer. Step 10. So what we want to do is to check and see how we did. And the question is, how do we do that? Well, I'm going to put a pin in on that seam and a pin in on this seam. And then I'm going to line this up with my lining and see whether it turns out that the seams have it so that on the inside they're a little bit smaller. Now I'm going to show you something. I did this the first time, and you can see that my first set of stitches ended up that actually, because I changed feet, I should have done the same foot and used the zipper foot for doing the lining so that everything stayed equal. By changing the foot, I didn't end up with my 1/4 inch being identical. So that meant I was actually a bit bigger on my inside than on my outside, which is the exact opposite that I needed. So I did another seam farther in to compensate, and I now have this just a fraction smaller. See how tiny the fraction smaller that is? That's all I wanted, was a hint smaller. So I do not need to actually rip out that first set of stitching. So under normal circumstances, I would have been doing all of this stitching with red to match, but then you wouldn't be able to see what I'm talking about with it near as ease. So when you do this with red, that's never going to show through. So I need you to go with some pins and check to make sure that your innards are fractionally, and you saw it just a fraction, smaller than your outer one. Off you go. Step 11. And now we are ready to take our front to our back, and somehow I lost track of my chopstick. So I'm going to use this particular, I'm not even sure what it is. I think it's just a little dowel. But initially, I'm just going to gently start turning. Now, one of the reasons that I chose my 14 count equivalent to do this with is turning something that is that little bit bigger is a lot easier to do than something that's teeny tiny. I remember thinking, oh, I should learn how to sew with a sewing machine on something small like Barbie clothes, and my mother going, oh, no, no, no. Don't do Barbie clothes for your first one, because the smaller it is, the harder it is. Let's do walking doll clothes first. And sure enough, my mom was right that it was easier to do bigger. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to pull out each of these seams so that we can get the correct shape with the toes. So you can see that I'm doing this, and there's times that what I do is I will take a pin and I will put the pin into the seam itself and pull it so that I don't have anything hidden on the inside. Now, this is certainly where you discover if your toe is truly rounded or whether you accidentally got a bit of a box shape. You can always go in and take out that toe if you don't like its shape and redo it. So all I'm doing is I'm pulling each of these out. And I'm checking to make sure that indeed the way I've got this stitch centered, that it actually makes sense. Now I can see by this heel, that heel is not the shape I want, but it's not that the sewing is definitely wrong, it's that I have some of the material folded in. So as soon as I take that pin and start shaping that, oh, the polka dots on the back are cute, then I get a heel. Okay, so at this point, I'm actually quite happy with, I've got a little bit of the red material on both sides, and then when I pull it flat, you can't see the back. And I've got a heel. I might have to actually round that. Oh, I haven't pulled it out quite perfectly. Okay, so your job is to get your front and back right side out. And when you are happy with your shape, you are going to go to your ironing surface, put down the towel, and you're going to press this with your pretty stitch down so that it stays the way you want. You can finger press if you are like, oh, I don't want to press this. Finger pressing is really just pinching, and it does actually help to do that so that nothing goes out of place when you use the actual iron. So if you're happy enough doing that, feel free to do that. But while you're at the pressing station, you are also going to fold under the top, and you're going to press it like this. Now we have extra play area here. I said to cut this one at 1/2 inch, so you can determine whether you want your stitch to be right to the top or whether you want a little bit of space above that. Each of us can choose something a little bit different, but then what we choose, we want to try and be consistent from one stocking to the next. So I'll probably have a little bit of space there. And after I have pressed this, I am going to actually use a ruler for sure and see how far under I turned that. Because then I'm going to actually take this. We are not turning this the other way out. We're leaving it like this. And my fingers won't. And then what we do is we bring this to the outside and we press that like this. So I know it sounds funny to not change this around, but the right side is on the inside right now. And that's what will be your lining. This part will be enclosed by your stocking. So off you go. Time to do some ironing. Step 12. Okay, so we're getting there. You need to figure out what you're going to use as your hanger. So you can make one out of cording, floss, beads, a piece of material, what I did here was I cut a piece of material that was about 5 inches long by, now I did it only an inch, and then I folded the sides in and sewed it in place so that there's no raw edges on the outside. There's so many ways you can make a hanger. So after the pressing, this looks like this. This looks like this. I did end up being concerned that I was going to have too much bulk, so I cut off the original seam that was too big on the way around so that this would fit in. So then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to put it into the stocking. And actually I've got to make sure I've got this, oh, don't do that. So you have to make sure that you know which way your toe is going. So the toe needs to go to the toe. And we're going to go in. And then you're going to open it up, and you're going to actually use your thumb to press the toe into the toe and the heel into the heel, and have this come up here. And literally, you can see that my lining is right there. I can get my toe and my heel all sorted out. Okay, so you've made your hanger, and the next step was to pop your lining on the inside of your stocking. Now, if you are wanting to have lace at the top of your stocking, you'll want to have a longer hanger because part of it will be covered by the lace. And you would actually insert it right now between these. I actually think that I'm going to leave this without having a lot of extra stuff. I'm a little bit like Laura Stitching by the Shore, that there are times that I believe a bit of minimalism goes a long way, and that for me, if I add too many bits and baubles, that it actually makes it so that the focus isn't the stitch. So this is going to be over, and then I'm going to tuck this in between the lining. So can you see that it's between the lining and the outside? And then I'm going to skivvy it over so that it's close to the seam but not on top of the seam. And then we're going to sew all the way around the top. Now, if you've got matching thread and you've got the ability to work it on your sewing machine to do something this small, fabulous. It may be that you're going to choose to do it by hand. Either way, you're going to end up closing off this top seam, and you will actually have a stocking that you can put some candy in. So off you go. Step 13. And here we are. I'm going to show you how I slip stitched my top. Now you can see, you're not seeing any stitching. You can clearly see this is a fillable stocking. And I've got my hanger in place. So the question is, how did I do this? And in the last step I said, if you can do it by the machine, that is fine. You could top stitch all the way around the top. My machine, it was going to be tricky because of how small this opening is. When I use a full size stocking, it is easy for me to remove a piece of my landing area, and then I just have something about this wide underneath the needle and presser foot, so I can just run it around. But that wasn't going to work this time. So all I did was I hid my stitching. Now, I'm going to be honest with you and say I did stitch in red just in case anything showed. But when I did this, the first thing I did was I anchored this in place and I stitched it to the seam on the inside. In that way, I know that there's something firm, and I could really go through all of the layers of the seam and all of the layers of my hanger and get it firmly in place and knot it. And because I was using the seam, you don't see anything on the side. Here, what I did was I made a knot in the end, and then I brought up my needle inside the pressed over seam allowance that I had chosen for the front, and I came up inside. So I'm actually going to show you. So I would have done this from the inside, but I came up right there. Now I didn't put a knot in it this time, so I could just pull it through. And then all I did was I moved maybe 1/4 of an inch, and then I took what I call a tiny bite, just the smallest smidgen of the lining, and then I pulled it through, and then I did the same thing over and over so that I had a whole bunch of tiny stitches that connected the lining to the stitch proper, but that the place where the thread was carried from one spot to the other is hidden on the inside of that fold. And by doing that, did I take my time? Yes, it took a little bit of time, but this isn't so big that it takes a lot of time. But when you do that, and then at the end, I did my bit where I made a knot, not quite against the piece of material, and then I pulled it through to be hidden on the inside, and then I trimmed. So you are ready for step 14. Step 14, you now have a finished stocking ready to use and or gift away. I hope you've enjoyed learning how to do these stockings in many different ways and can choose what way is the best for you to continue to have fun with this 12 Days of Christmas stocking project. It's been a pleasure to work with you on this. I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye for now from the Stitching Owl.